America is slowly strangling itself by failing to clearly define its own culture. President Trump's ballroom is only the most recent example of this far greater issue, but it doesn't have to be this way. President Trump's ballroom is the largest change in federal infrastructure since President Truman's reconstruction of the White House in 1949. Projects like these set the standard for American infrastructure and consequently American culture. The 90,000 square foot extension comes at a crucial time. American society has been deteriorating, a notion you've probably heard time and time again from commentators, intellectuals, and politicians. But it's not for the reason these people think. It's not moral, it's not political, it's not economic, it's infrastructural. When something is not clearly defined, then there is nothing to cherish and protect. Infrastructure is literally the foundation of society. It immediately defines culture. There's a reason why archaeologists study first and foremost the architecture of ancient civilizations when they want to understand their culture. Without a uniquely American architecture, there is no definitive foundation for American culture. The alterations to the White House could have changed that and set an excellent precedent for the future of this country. Unfortunately, they have gone completely in the wrong direction. Criticisms of the project have been architecturally inert. They're obviously politically motivated. People use preservation as an argumentative tool when they don't really care about preservation at all. Plenty of historical buildings are demolished all the time at the local and state level. People largely ignore these instances because there's little political gain in attacking them. True preservationists participate in these small battles because that is where their actions have concrete results. That being said, I don't think the East Wing should have been demolished, but I'll get to that later. Another criticism is the question of legality. Certain laws exist for self-evident reasons. Stealing is illegal to protect those who actually work. When it comes to construction, especially federal construction, the laws are not designed for quality of outcome. They're designed to slow the process down as much as possible so that large changes can almost never be made. Not unless you have complete commitment and the willingness to suffer through a dozen layers of bureaucracy. In other words, these laws make it a crime to avoid bureaucracy. Case in point, NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, does not require environmentally positive outcomes. It only requires that the environmental effects of demolition and construction for federal projects be documented. A full NEPA review can take upwards of 5 years, which can inadvertently cause more damage to the environment. By demoing the East Wing, President Trump has purposefully done something that cannot be undone, which is a clever way of circumventing bureaucracy and, at the very least, guaranteeing the construction of something. Bringing down bureaucracy is unequivocally a good thing. It does nothing to protect existing architecture, it only makes it harder to develop new architecture. We shouldn't have to rely on bureaucracy to preserve our culture. If the White House was a true symbol of democracy, no president would be able to demo it without risking impeachment. The reality is that the frailty of our culture is showing. People are ignoring bureaucratic laws and are tired of performative institutions. When it comes to the ballroom, the criticisms are insincere. They miss the point entirely, and worse yet, they obscure the true failing in American infrastructure, namely that the ballroom is more of the same, borrowed European culture that reeks of aristocracy, centralized power, and detachment from responsibility, all ideas that are antithetical to democracy, and yet characteristic of our civic architecture as a whole. Take the United States Capitol building, for example. Notice the clear hierarchy of elements, Corinthian columns supporting an entablature, flanked on both sides by symmetrical wings, separated by a dominant central rotunda, that rises up in clearly defined levels to an eventual pinnacle. This is the United States Capitol in function, but nothing about the architecture reflects that. What it does reflect, of course, is Greco-Roman society, as all neoclassical architecture does. Tall, ornate columns, stark white facade, strong vertical axes. These elements implicitly say, this place is not for you, your role is to observe, not participate, and those who work here are above you. This all sounds like something awfully familiar. Monarchy. Which makes sense given the European origins of neoclassicism. And in just the same way a palace protects a king from the consequences of his actions, so too does the Capitol building protect lawmakers from confronting their decisions, by physically separating those who make the law from those who follow the law. Suffice it to say, democracy is not part of the equation. The ballroom parallels exactly this, with a touch of Gilded Age excess. And because neoclassical architecture is intentionally dated, it creates chronal mismatch between modern technology and design. To illustrate what I'm saying, take a look at this photo of the Utah State Capitol, which funnily enough looks almost identical to the US Capitol. What do you immediately notice? Perhaps it's the clean, modern-looking flag, which looks great by the way, flying atop what is the architectural equivalent of a fossil. In all fairness, the White House does suffer from inadequate space. But what really is the civic function of this ballroom? Yes, it accommodates guests, no more seating dignitaries in tents, thank goodness. However, looking at it strictly from a day-to-day basis, what kind of actual political work happens here? None. What will eventually be the largest space in the White House serves no practical civic function. That is pure architectural dishonesty. From the very beginning, the US has struggled to distinguish its own culture. When it comes to architecture, it has relied on borrowing from great societies in the past. But what made these societies great was developing their own architecture, making it uniquely theirs. Neoclassicism venerates Greco-Roman design, but the name Greco-Roman tells it all. The Romans were unable to fully distinguish themselves from their predecessors, and they ultimately paid the price. Most people will agree with me when I say American architecture must belong to the American people and the American landscape. Otherwise, it cannot be called democratic. In terms of engineering, this means utilizing modern methods of construction and materials fitting with our time period. America is known for innovations like the Model T and the first transcontinental railroad. Compare the Model T to the Chariot. One is functional, the other performative. One is affordable, the other expensive. One is democratic, the other aristocratic. That is true American design, true American culture. In terms of philosophy, it means a proper democracy, one where power rests not with the majority, but with the sovereignty of the individual, to be able to make his own decisions in pursuit of his own happiness with infrastructure that enables him. Architecturally, this involves decentralization, integration with humanity and nature, and functional honesty. Power, as reflected by our civic buildings, must be fluid, not a concentrated solid. Our politics must be built from the ground up, which is only possible when buildings belong to their landscape and serve their occupants. And our structures must explain themselves through use, not through myth, and certainly not through European history. Instead of demolishing the East Wing and replacing it with our own Palace of Versailles, the White House should have been preserved exactly as it was, and the executive branch relocated to a completely new building, a building where it can serve the American people honestly rather than being served, a building where democracy lives transparently without needing history to justify its existence. This ensures that America's past is preserved for posterity, that its present culture is clearly defined, and that its future is welcomed rather than feared. Yes, a change like this would be massive, but it's the kind of change that would unlock us from the history of past societies which, I remind you, have already collapsed. Surprisingly, there is nothing in the Constitution that says the executive branch must be located in the White House. Our first president didn't even live there. The biggest technical difficulty would be security during construction and transition. But here's the thing. The White House itself is actually bad operationally. It's constrained by its site on all four sides, and its security systems are all retrofitted, involving things like sniper crews, infrared cameras, and physical barriers. The architecture itself does nothing for security. In fact, it prioritizes symbolism over pragmatism, which makes maintaining security more difficult. And not to bring it up again, but putting dignitaries in tents doesn't help. A purpose-built executive facility would be easier to secure and operate once complete. That, to me, is a much greater show of strength than the current delicate neoclassical artifact. The hardest part of constructing a new building is neither constitutional nor technical. It's convincing the American people that it's the right move. And given what I've said thus far, I'm sure I'll be on the receiving end of that firestorm. But think of it this way. If moving the seat of the free world out of an 18th century Palladian mansion feels like sacrilege, then the architecture has stopped serving democracy and replaced it. Legitimacy must be earned. It cannot be inherited from history. That being said, the new building must not be another neoclassical palace. Its monumentality must come from its ability to facilitate democracy so effectively that to demolish it would be to demolish democracy itself. You should be able to look at it, and it should say American architecture, not neoclassical. At this point in time, the East Wing has already been demoed. The plans for the ballroom are nebulous. The best thing to do now is make sure that the ballroom is built in line with the White House's current style, that everything flows seamlessly, and that it doesn't make a complete mockery of our architecture and our republic.